Okay, so Jihad, you want to introduce yourself and let us know what you do because I'm actually really excited about this.
Yeah, definitely. My name is Jehad Ibrahim, and I'm happy to connect with everybody. And I think part of it is, yes, we're all connected here. And I've noticed that you guys have a pretty large community, and it's really great to see that it's continuing to grow. And within that connection, we're going to be able to start to connect with oneself, right? Starting to tap into one of the most valuable tools that is, I would say, free, right? We do it every day, voluntary and involuntary, and it is one of our 11 systems of the body. So we'll be able to tap in there. But I specialize in educating others in connecting their breath, and within that space, I've also been able to branch out and tie it into corrective exercise. So I work with a lot of members or clients who have had injuries and are bridging the gap from physical therapy into the exercise world. So, I would say we have a mixed group here as far as ages and our age range. And it's great to see that we all have very important fitness goals to ourselves. But then again, there's going to be a time where our body is going to either A, give out, and it's not going to be as strong, as stable, as well connected if we're not doing the work. So today we're going to be covering breath work, and if you are someone who is had developed any kind of lower back pain through specific lifts, picking up a piece of paper off the ground, that's possible. That's common for some people. Whether you're picking up a heavy load or a light load, poor movement or a poor strategy could cause injury. So obviously, that's something we want to prevent. But within that space, we want to also understand that if we're looking to have a strong core and are looking to have ownership of this machine that we use every day that doesn't have an owner's manual, let's dive into this piece and start to maybe practice and explore. And a lot of it might be new information. Some of it might be some of us maybe have heard about other forms of breathing exercises. But I'm here to help inspire that and to help answer any questions that one might have when it comes to how to explore and what to look for and how to be specific to yourself. And let's tap into that. So well, of course, I think it'll be appropriate to leave questions for the end, but I think that we have a small group. So, Miriam, I'm actually going to ask you, what do you prefer? And what does the crowd prefer? Do they prefer to ask questions as we go, or do we want to wait for the end? Because we have a pretty intimate group here, I would say.
So I don't know who Miriam is, but somebody I think Tony wrote Miriam by accident. But
All right, not
I'm
Miriam.
actually Marette. um,
Marette?
yes, and I actually sing opera, and it's been very difficult because I've had a lot of health issues coming up, of like very recently. Um, that have affected my, just my breathing techniques, specifically with my diaphragm not like just performing properly. So I'm wondering if you can touch up on that. I would definitely leave the questions till the end, if anything, through the chat, and then we can cover them. So if anybody has any questions, they can type it into the chat, and then after you're finished, we can cover them. However you prefer.
Perfect. Sounds good. That sounds good.
Okay.
Not Miriam. Marette, thank you.
Marette. You can call
I
me
appreciate
Tuti.
it.
That's
I
funny.
got you. Thank you. Thank you.
Miriam is my mother's name, so yeah,
Oh, okay.
it's
Okay.
funny.
So it's really cool, and I'm happy that you opened up with the fact that you have a history of singing opera, and I think that's amazing. Um, Ultimately, we want to have that ability to connect that breath that you've had in the past or you've been coached on in the past, and so when Marette brought up the diaphragm, we'll talk about the diaphragm a little bit, but truthfully, the diaphragm it starts from our collarbone and ends from our sits bones. And our sits bones are basically tied to our hips at the bottom base of our hips. So, what we're going to explore today is tapping into that diaphragm. And within that diaphragm, just to also be clear, is there's muscles that support our core, which also in turn support our spine, that we want to tap into throughout this breathing cycle or throughout this breathing phase or throughout this exploration process. So I'm really happy that you opened up. I used to say, and it's very ironic here because we have a baby in the crowd and we have an opera singer in the crowd, because whenever I would educate others on breathing, I'd say there's two people in the world that breathe the best, and that is a baby and an opera singer. So it's pretty cool. I really love that.
That's funny,
Um,
actually. I love it. Yeah,
so and I'll explain a little bit more why, as far as why babies breathe the best. And there you have it. I would say probably the one who breathes the most effective is that one right there. That's Kareem. And the reason being is we are born actually with an effective breathing strategy. We're very mobile beings when we come out of the womb. And unfortunately, as we get older and as we sit more and as we do specific things, we exercise, maybe we don't mobilize our joints as much, we start to develop poor strategies. So breathing is a habit, it is a strategy, it is a method of and a tool of life. But unfortunately, it is said that 80% of the population breathes inefficiently. And doesn't make us bad people, but we all have the capability of experimenting and incorporating breathing exercises the same way that we would incorporate core exercises post a workout. So, as I mentioned earlier, a really big thing is I'm not looking to change anyone's workout program. I'm not looking to be a dictator in the coaching process as I coach my clients, but I do enjoy giving them the base of the foundations of how to own their body and how to connect their core and how to protect themselves from injury. So we'll highlight the diaphragm a little bit. And I really wanted to highlight the fact that yes, babies breathe the most effectively because we have a strategy that has developed as we come out of the womb that's the most effective. And and I challenge you, if anyone has kids in the crowd here, pay attention to the way that the babies breathe, pay attention to the way that they squat and how they sit so upright and so beautifully with their posture. So it's some things to kind of take note of. And remember, we're not looking to be perfect. It's not about perfection, but it's about optimizing our structure. This way we could build upon it. Okay. So I explained already a couple of reasons why, but I'm going to touch up and really specify. Number one, we're going to increase our core stability and our stability as a whole throughout our body as we incorporate three-dimensional breathing through the diaphragm. Um, Another thing that's very helpful about breathing three-dimensionally is we're going to be able to have a tool to decompress our spine. So creating space within our spine, because that is one of the most common injuries that we could take on as we use this body every single day. And lastly, as far as the three things that we're going to be focusing on are why and why we'll continue doing this is connection. And part of it is connecting the nervous system, because in turn, connecting the nervous system will connect our muscular system. So the brain is what's really controlling our nervous system, and the brain is always going to be our ultimate factor on whether or not we could do specific movements and we could increase our ability to do that without breaking down. Okay. So when it comes to stability, I want to highlight a couple of things. Firstly, we're going to be breathing into this structure as we explore that in the next 5 minutes. We're going to be focusing on breathing through this structure, and that's going to be pressure that's going to be supporting us throughout exercise. I think that we have a pretty solid crowd of strength training. I see a lot more strength training. I would say athletes, because we're all moving our bodies here. I get the idea that we have a lot of strength training in here, and I love that, because building muscle is what's going to be our most beneficial anti-aging tool. And as we're building pressure throughout our core, we're going to have a stronger core to be able to take on heavier loads throughout, whether it's deadlifting, whether it's overhead pressing, squatting. So it's something that we want to build that pressure and that support, that stability within this structure. Okay. As we focus on decompressing the spine, I invite you all to use this breathing method as a tool if you ever feel like you have put a little bit more stress on your body than you have before. And that could be you hitting a personal best on your deadlift, or you carrying a heavier load for a longer period of time than you're used to, simply enough. The spine is supposed to be as straight as possible to be able to maintain the weight and to be able to maintain the body's motions throughout a day. So, decompressing the spine is ultimately going to keep our spine healthy. And I know we've seen some older people in our lives, and we see how hunched they could get over time. That's something that could be prevented now as we start to incorporate some of these breathing strategies. So I invite us all to remember that yes, this is a tool to develop core stability and strength, but it's also a tool to be able to create space and support for our spine. And the spine is pretty important for us to be able to function, as it does tie into our nervous system. And that's the last piece that we're going to see is connecting the nervous system. And as I mentioned before, the brain controls movement, but we have the ability of controlling our nervous system with breath. And just to give you a very brief story, I'm not so fond of the dentist. I don't know many people that get very excited and hip hip hooray when it comes to getting a tooth pulled out. But uh, a couple years ago, me going to the dentist, I had to get a tooth pulled out. And during the process, you start to notice that, yeah, if it's not something you're super comfortable with, you're going to develop stress throughout your body. You might start sweating a little bit. You might start clenching your hands, as I did, uncontrollably. Well, we have the ability of tapping into our breath to settle our nervous system. So if it's a flight that you're nervous to go on, if it is a interview or a webinar that you might be nervous to be communicating in front of strangers, then you have the ability of tapping into your breath to get your nervous system to wind down. You have the ability to tap into your breath if you're in the chair and you're in the dentist and you're feeling so stressed, you're feeling so nervous, you want to lose your mind, but you have that tool to say, you know what? I'm fine. I have the ability of calming down. So it sounds simple, but I think many of us forget that. And it could be as simple enough as doing a new exercise. So I know many of us, as we're exploring exercise and we're pushing ourselves, we might be incorporating a new exercise that's new to us. I know some of us, like myself, will find that they're holding their breath because they're focusing on something new. So I invite you to pay attention to that as well. As you're exercising, how often are you focusing on your breath through motion? Okay, so I don't expect anyone to obsess breath work the same way that I do, but as I do want to invite you guys to challenge yourself and to explore breath and not to be obsessive of it, but to be a bit more aware of it. And just to challenge yourself on being a little bit more aware of it through exercise specifically. So, as I get everyone's attention and maintain everyone's attention, I just want to I want us all to work through this next piece. And it will take us about 5 minutes to cover this piece. And it's something that I think is probably the most important aspect of this webinar here. So from here, we're going to cover an assessment to challenge and to check where your breath travels when you take a deep breath. Right. And I'll demonstrate first. As I put my hand on my chest, a hand on my belly, I want you guys to observe where the air travels when you take a big breath in. So it's good that we don't have cameras on, and that's fine. I'm going to call out Miriam Ibrahim because I don't see her participating yet. So what we'll do is, as we put our hand on our chest and a hand on our belly, we're going to take a big breath in, or say for a count of 4, pause for a second, and then fully exhale. So I'll show you first. Big breath in, pause, and exhale. All right, we'll do that one more time. Take that breath in at your own pace. And whenever you'd like, you exhale and empty out. So observe where that breath was. I'd like to see in the comments, or I'd like for you guys to let me know, where do you feel that breath travel to the most? It could be into the chest. You might feel your neck raising. You might feel chest down to the belly. So as I take time to assess people regularly on this, I would say I get a very big portion of members, clients, people that take a pretty heavy chest breath. And that's fine. That's perfectly fine. But we are missing a very important link when it comes to how we could gain control of the structure. So as I mentioned before, our diaphragm is going to be from our collarbone down to our sits bone. So if you're sitting on a chair, the bones that you feel on the bottom of your chair, on your seat, under your butt, those are your sits bones. So if we're breathing into our chest, we're leaving all of that other space vulnerable, but also inactive, not working, not firing, not kicking on when it comes to us needing it for whether it's an exercise or it's us doing our best to just create space, as I mentioned before. So it's very common. I get a view of some of the comments before, and I noticed that Matt had mentioned that he doesn't get too much into the belly, and that's very common. Unfortunately, right? That's just giving you an area of opportunity to focus a bit more on. It's something that might feel new to start, but as you start to tap into it, your brain will recognize it and it'll take it back because this is a foundational breathing method, as I mentioned before, we're born doing. So it just takes a little bit of tapping in and it takes a little bit of feel. Okay, so we're going to take the next 3 minutes now to explore this breath. And the best way to do this is going to be on your back. And if you're not on your back, that's totally fine. If you're standing, it's going to be a little bit more difficult. If you're holding on to something, it's going to be a bit more difficult because you want to give your brain that opportunity to just tap into that one task. So if you're not lying down right now, if you're just listening in, that's totally fine as well. But the best way to explore your breath and to be able to challenge your breath and to be able to own your breath is going to be lying down on your back with your legs elevated. I would say at a 90-degree angle, preferably, because that's when your body is at complete rest and at complete ease, and it doesn't have to focus on any other task. When we explore that breath, we're using our hands as physical touch to be able to signal to our brain where we want to transfer that breath. So if some of you are exploring that, or some of you put yourself in that position, let's give that a shot. If you're in a seated position, you'll still have an opportunity to participate. So as I place my hands on the lower part of my belly, and I want to also encourage you all to not feel the need to tense or to create tension in your core. Think about your core being nice and relaxed. No tension needed in this specific practice. So I'll show you guys first because it is recorded, and I do hope that other people will give themselves this opportunity to explore this. And as I mentioned before, trying it best or trying it first will be best on your back. On your back, legs elevated at complete rest. So I'll demonstrate in a seated position. And as I'm in this position, I'm going to place my hands on the low part of my core. We're focusing on taking a 4-second inhale, pausing for 1 second, and then a complete exhale, and then pausing for 1 second. So I'll demonstrate 3 breaths. Hands are low. I'm just signaling to my brain that this is where I want to travel that breath. Take a breath in. I pause. I exhale. I pause. Slow breath in. About for a count of 4. I pause for a second and exhale. And I pause for a second. Last one here, taking that breath low. That would be the first spot to start. And to highlight that space real quick, when it comes to developing true core stability, as mentioned before, we don't want to leave this space vulnerable. we want to increase pressure into this space. We want to increase support, stability. So breathing into the chest will give us a level of control, but we're leaving that level of activation of our core. We're leaving that level of spinal support away. So I always explore breathing that breath low first, and then I transfer my hands to my rib cage. We want to be able to focus on breathing low, wide, and around the low back to create support around this three-dimensional structure. So we start low, we bring our hands to the rib cage, we're just giving some encouragement, breathing in, pausing for a second, exhaling, taking another breath in, pausing for 1 second, and then exhaling. One very important aspect to highlight, because I speak so highly about stability. We have two very mobile joints here that we're focused on around that are surrounding that core. We have our shoulders and we have our hips. So when we think about doing any kind of shoulder-based motion, it could be a pull-down exercise or a pull-up or an overhead press. This is a very mobile joint. To create stability around that mobile joint, we want to breathe into the space that is surrounding that joint. So breathing into the rib cage will support the shoulder. In turn, breathing into the pelvis will support our hips. So when we think about increasing hip mobility, yes, we could stretch our hips as much as we can, but the first stage of getting in it or improving our hip mobility would be us breathing into our hips, giving our nervous system that support and understanding, but also creating space in our hips. So we have that ability. And as I mentioned to you, it might not happen today, it might not happen tomorrow, but as you start to go into that breathing, you start to challenge yourself to breathe as low as you can, using your hands, tapping into your brain and getting yourself to really get your brain to feel that sensation of breathing into your hands. It takes practice. And I do mention it might not happen right away, and that's okay. The last space I want to really touch base on when it comes to our breathing, three-dimensionally, is going to be into our lower back. And I'll show you from the side real quick. When it comes to me positioning myself, remember, best would be on our back. But I always place my hands around my lower back just like this. And as I'm in that position, the same way that I did before, just giving my brain that feedback will give us the ability of starting to feel some air travel into that space. And as I mentioned, it might feel different. It might feel like it's hard to get that breath to get there. And that's okay. It's going to be something that can be practiced for a short period of time regularly. And you'll start to find that it's easier to get that breath to travel into the lower back, easier to get to that breath to travel down into the pelvis, easier to get that breath wide into the shoulders and rib cage. So just to recap, we're looking to breathe into three spaces. It's best to do on our back and using our hands, sometimes also using a belt, a towel, a yoga strap could also be good ways to increase that connection of breathing wider into the lower back. But it's us just taking the time to explore that breath, but own that breath over time. Last piece I want to highlight when it comes to breathing three-dimensionally that I want you guys to start to maybe check out as well. I don't know if anyone here uses a lifting belt. Sometimes you'll see a lot of power lifters or anybody that's doing Olympic lifting. They'll be using a weightlifting belt that's going to be surrounding their core. A lot of the times, there's two reasons why people are using that belt. The most common reason, unfortunately, is really to create stability because that stability in the back isn't there. The second reason why is keeping it loose enough to the point where your brain gets that feedback of breathing into that space. Ultimately, When it comes to this three-dimensional breathing, we're looking to create our own weightlifting belt internally. But if that support is needed, a lifting belt could also be on. But my suggestion for those that I would like for you guys to try out as you start to tap into your breath is keeping it just loose enough to the point where your brain feels the ability of breathing into that belt. And you could even use a belt if you'd like, just a regular belt to practice your breathing, just to try it out. So as you're starting to tap into that three-dimensional breath, and it's not going to be as easy when you work out, you're able to use that weightlifting belt as a tool to get that feedback to breathe wider, to breathe into the lower back, to create that intra-abdominal pressure and support. All right, so I'd like to highlight a couple things as far as I often get questions from my clients on, should I be breathing this way all day long? Should I be breathing this way every day? You're talking to me right now. Are you breathing that way? It's definitely situational. As I mentioned before, we want to tap into that breath. We want to be more aware of that breath. It's not going to be perfect and it's not supposed to be perfect, but we want to optimize it. So my suggestion would be, through exercise, be very mindful of it, especially when it comes to specific lifts. If we're deadlifting, weightlifting belt or not, it is ideal to be focused on breathing into the lower back, giving it that support. This way, we're getting the right working muscles like the hips, the core, the hamstrings to get us the power through that lift. Situational, right? It's situational. As we're in a plank position, as I'm in that plank position, we're challenging our shoulder stability. We're challenging our posture. We're challenging our core. So it'll be likely that as we're in that position, we should feed that breath into the rib cage as we're challenging that shoulder stability. If we're hanging up from a pull-up bar, yes, it's situational. We have the ability to challenge that breath, but we have the ability of giving our body that support in those joints when needed. Situational. If it comes down to situations when you are taking a long flight and you're in a seated position for a long time and you feel like your lower back is acting up, it's healthy for you to place your hands into your lower back and explore that breath wide into the lower back to create space and to give it that support. So every time that if I'm ever flying for over 4 hours, it is always a mandatory thing whenever I get to my place, my point of destination, that I just do at least 5 minutes of breathing. Just quick 5 minutes, reset my posture as I lay down, and I just get to focus on clearing up that breath. So I really want to highlight that aspect of making sure that we understand that, yes, it's something that we should tap into every day. We're not going to obsess it. We will explore it, but it's also situational on when to tap into it during certain times. So I'd like to open the floor for any questions as I've rambled off a lot of information about this very simple thing that we do every day. And I'd love to hear what some of us have to say, or if they've explored that breathing that we covered before, if they've experienced something new that they'd like to share. So I'd like to open the floor, Murat, for anybody that's got any questions.
Sure. I guess if anybody has any questions, they can speak up. I will say that when my back is actually tense, I have asthma personally, so when my back is tense, it's harder to breathe. And I didn't realize until what you said, I didn't realize how important that was for the spine to be involved in breathing. Not sure if I'm making sense.
Absolutely. No, it's so when the back gets tense, most of the time it's going to be muscles around the lower back or muscles around, it could be maybe sometimes in the shoulder blade area for some people, but oftentimes those muscles could be relaxed by getting the nervous system to wind down through basic breathing. Um, when we think about the idea behind a muscle relaxer is going to have its ability of getting the nervous system to get those muscles to wind down. And if you think about it, that's kind of why it's kind of why kids back in the days when it was a muscle relaxer epidemic and there was a lot of people taking prescription drugs, it was to basically get their nervous system to calm down. If you think about it, they're getting themselves at a more mellow point. Their body is starting to relax. It feels a little bit more easy going. Granted, not the best situation to be using it, but we have the ability of getting muscles to relax through tapping into breath, but also, like I said before, being in a position that allows your body to be at complete rest on your back, legs elevated, and just with a calm breath.
Hey, Jihad, I got a question. Just we were talking about the weight belt and how, breathing into your core is going to help you with stability when you're lifting. Do you recommend using it or not using it? I hear different things. It's good for stability when you're lifting heavy, but not on your normal sets. I see people using it just the whole time at the gym, so I'm just curious what your thoughts are on it.
Love that question because it is commonly used, and there are a couple ways to use it and to get benefit out of it. But my suggestion would be ultimately for most of us, for everyone, to be able to create their own weightlifting belt, right? And that's going to be through practicing breath, and that's going to be through really getting us to connect our core through different strategies. But it depends really on the person's goals as well. If someone is a power lifter and they're looking to push through weight and they're looking to increase their personal best when it comes to heavy lifts that are demanding on the spine, like the squat and the deadlift, then it's really going to be up to you at that point to be able to connect your core. But my suggestion would be if you are going to be using a belt, to always keep it with a little bit more room. This way you could breathe into that space. When we think about at the end of a deadlift, or we think about at the end of most power-based exercises, we want to connect our exhale with our exertion. So ultimately, you're going to be inhaling at some point, you're going to be exhaling at some point. So giving your spine that support, giving your core that connection is going to be the most effective strategy when it comes to doing this exercise, this sport, whatever it is that you're doing longer. So I would suggest for most of us to be able to work internally, connect that breath deep. In a perfect world, if we're all doing breathing exercises 5 minutes a day, I think it'll go a long way for sure. But for the sake of the general public, I would definitely suggest that we connect our core. If we're using a belt, keep it loose to breathe into that space. Do not be so used to always keeping it very tight because it is likely that you're going to rely on that without building that structure yourself. Great question.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for that.
I'd like one more. I'd like one more question because I know as simple as it could be, it's how we could maybe apply it. And so I'd like to hear if there's anybody that's experienced any low back pain that they'd like a little bit of support with, or if they have any questions or any neck pain. And it doesn't have to be pain related, but I know we ain't young these days, and I'll speak for myself. As I'm 30, over 30 now, my body does develop pains a lot easier than when I was in my 20s. So, I mean, power to the ones that are in their 20s still in this group here. God bless you all. All right. So, one thing I want to highlight, if there's anybody that's focused on cardio, and I'll answer this question here because I know that as we're all fitness junkies and we're all moving, we should all be doing some form of cardio. Hands down, whoever it is, whatever goals you are, whether it's a stairmaster, whether it's the rower, whether it's an incline treadmill, whether it's a run, a cycle, anything, we should be challenging our heart. I want to highlight that as we're breathing through cardio, it is ideal for us to have a rhythmic breathing pattern. So if you're walking on the treadmill, you might find yourself that you're talking on the phone. You're going to have to keep it at a pace that's manageable. Because once you start losing that ability to talk, that takes exercise from aerobic, taking in oxygen and breathing, to anaerobic, which is going to be a different energy system. We have the ability of burning more fat in an aerobic based exercise. So keeping our respiratory connected through being on the rower for 30 minutes, on the Stairmaster for a longer period of time, if so be, we're going to get more out of the energy that we're burning, fat, if we're focusing and tapping into our breathing through exercise, especially when it comes to long distance cardio based training. So that's something that's hard to do because we don't really focus as humans. When there's a task at hand, we're going to be focused on the task at hand more so than the breathing. So pay attention to that when you're doing your cardio. Pay attention to your ability to stay with your breathing pattern as a rhythm. As you start to challenge yourself, can you maintain that same breathing pattern? Or do you feel yourself starting to lose breath easier? So that's what I have for you all today. Unless somebody has another question, I'm more than happy to answer. More questions, the better for me, truthfully.
Does anybody have any questions?
I got
I think there was one in the chat.
Yes, I
I
have a
got
question.
one. Yes.
What's the most proper way to breathe when you're doing a push-up? Like, I get confused with the up and down, like when you're doing a push-up.
Okay. So I would suggest that the best and most effective strategy when it comes to breathing in or breathing out during a push-up, the proper breathing pattern, the most effective, I would inhale on the way down, and then I would exhale with exertion. If you are new to pushing up, if developing your push-ups is new for you right now, then I would also suggest taking an inhale at the top before you go into your rep, going down, and then exhaling with exertion. But I always suggest exhaling with exertion. When you start to really flow with the push-ups, and if you're comfortable with your push-ups, inhale down, exhale drive would be, in my opinion, the most effective strategy for breathing when it comes to doing a push-up.
Thank you.
And to kind of piggyback off of that question, it's always going to be situational. It's nothing we got to obsess, but we do explore. And I've said that pretty often today. And that's because even with something like an exercise such as the squat, I do variations of different style squats, whether it's front squatting or front rack kettlebell squats or body weight squats. I do body weight squats often before I run. If I have a weight in my hand, I'm going to either, just like I explained with the push-up, inhale at the top before I go into my rep, load, and exhale with exertion, or I would inhale down if the weight is controllable enough, exhale and drive. Without a weight, I would be focusing on exhaling on the descent, inhaling as I take myself back to my starting position. And that is because on the exhale, as I'm doing a body weight, I'm comfortable with that. It's second nature for me. So I'm exhaling to get length from my hips. I'm exhaling to get length through my hip flexors as I go into that squat position. And then I would inhale to take myself back up top. So I hope that doesn't confuse anybody, but ultimately, if you're doing an exercise like yoga, oftentimes you're going to be exhaling to get length through motion. So for me personally, the squat is a comfortable motion. So I have the ability of exhaling to get length as I go down rather than focusing on that support that would be needed if I had a weight. So I hope that creates a little bit more of an understanding as well.
Where are you based out of? Or is it New York or?
So I am based out of New York. And I mentioned to Tony that so I work in the city at a facility twice a week, and I did mention that we will be doing a raffle for anybody who's interested in this group to be able to come down and to have a session with me. One male, one female, getting the opportunity to come to my facility. I work with Lifetime Sky. It's on 42nd Street, right off the west side. And it's a beautiful space, and I'd love to share it with somebody, and I'd love to be able to tap into this work a little bit more than just this session alone. And I think it will go a long way. So I'm happy to do that as well. So thanks for the question. I wanted to lean in on that just because I don't want to forget that. I'd love to honor that, and I'd love to meet some people in this community in person. It'd be an honor.
Thank you, Jihad. Actually, we appreciate that very much.
It's my pleasure. So I'm not, as far as ways to reach me. I'm not on pardon me. I'm not on Instagram as much, but I know you guys have shared my Instagram handle before. If there's any other ways that you guys would like to connect with me, you're welcome to shoot me an email. And if you'd like to, once you get somebody, or once you get the winners of the raffle, if you guys take that on, I'd love to know, and I'd love to get that scheduled.
Awesome. I wanted to ask you, I do run out of breath because I have asthma and a hiatal hernia. When I do take a deep breath and I'm trying to extend, how long I can sing or like hold my breath while singing, um, how would you recommend that I do that, if that makes sense?
Okay. So an exercise that I'll practice often with my clients is of course extending the exhale. But part of that would come in with understanding that we have the ability of taking twice as long of an exhale than our inhale. So as I mentioned before, I think a great way to start is a 4-second inhale. And if you don't have the capability of doing a 4-second inhale, that is pretty clear that you should be doing some breathing exercises, because a shorter breath than 4 seconds is giving you a sign. We have the ability of taking up to as long as 30 seconds of an inhale, and it's very possible. So I know that I've done 25 seconds of an inhale and about just almost a 60-second exhale. So it is something that can be worked on. Some people to look into for, I wouldn't consider them all my mentors, but some people that I practice their style of breathing. Remember, three-dimensional breathing is a principle. It's something that we all have to do if we look to have ownership of this. But there's other styles, there's other flavors, there's other methods. Wim Hof offers a very interesting method. He's been doing it for quite some time. He's very into cold water exposure, just cold exposure. So I don't know if anybody's like a cold plunge addict right now, if they've been getting into that. But he uses a method where he'll take 30 rapid breaths, and that's to basically build internal heat. And then he'll focus on long breath holds. And just to briefly explain like the benefit behind that, a long breath hold, you're normally going to be expelling all of the oxygen out of your lungs, all your stale oxygen, which is possible. And you're also getting your body, your brain comfortable with just having CO2 in your lungs. That's when the brain and the nervous system will start to get very nervous because we rely on oxygen. So challenging your ability to withstand the stress levels, freaking out, when you have little to no oxygen and higher levels of CO2 is going to challenge you in moments where you'll be losing oxygen through high stress. Like you mentioned, if you're doing cardio and you're running out of breath, you'll be able to withstand that stress longer as you practice those longer breath holds without taking in oxygen or without being nervous on taking oxygen right away. So Wim Hof is a very interesting human being, and you'll notice right away if you watch any of his videos. But I would suggest trying out the Wim Hof breathing for beginners as a 10-minute introductory to a different method of breathing, or a different strategy, or just something different to challenge yourself when it comes to breathing exercises. So have fun with it, guys. It's a tool that we do voluntary and involuntary every day. It's something that we do that we don't even think of. So I do challenge people, and I do challenge every one of us as we go on for the next week to take at least one intentional breath a day. That's it. I'm not asking you to do 5 minutes. I'm not asking you to do anything else. But at some point of your day, just be a little bit more mindful. Take one intentional breath and see where that breath expands. Try to see if that breath could expand into your hips. When I say hips, it might sound like I'm talking about your glutes, but I'm really just talking about down past your belly button. So I like the idea of box breathing. And just to, Dodic mentioned that he does box breathing, and box breathing is correct me if I'm wrong, but it would be us taking a 4-second inhale, pausing for 4 seconds, 4-second exhale, pausing for 4 seconds. Sometimes it could be a 1-second pause for some people. But from my knowledge, box breathing would be a method where it's 4 seconds in, pausing for 4, exhaling for 4, and then pausing for 4. So many different methods. Last thing I want to share real quick. We live in a golden age where information is really where it's very accessible in any position or wherever we are in the world. We have access to audiobooks. If some of us like to read, I'm an audiobook guy. I'd love to be able to read more, but the best book that I would say when it comes to breathing is simply enough Breath by James Nestor. And simply enough, that book is going to show you how something so simple, as I mentioned before, if you're not already motivated by breathing, you'll be even more intentional about how it could really shape the mouth, how it could really shape the structure of our nose, just from being a little bit more aware. So it's very interesting stuff. But Breath by James Nestor would be a great book to tap into. Reading or audiobook is great. And Wim Hof would be a great, just a challenge to take on when it comes to a 10-minute breathing exercise sequence. Does anybody have any other questions?
So I just think, just as a summary, you're saying breathing exercises strengthen our ability to breathe during our regular day activities, right? So it's important, not just one intentional breath, but, just trying as many as we can throughout the day.
Yeah, so to be clear, doing some form of breathing exercises, it'll take us throughout this journey of life much longer and much more effectively. And as I mentioned, it will help the spine. It'll help keep the spine healthy. It'll tap into connecting our core. So if some of us feel like it's hard to get your core to activate through exercise, breathing into your core is going to get those muscles fired up. They're going to get everything woken up. And that's what's most of us are seeking out for when it comes to what we're doing exercise for, is to get muscles kicked on. So I would say, in summary, the best way to practice breathing is just to start by being intentional daily. And it could start by doing 1 breath to 5, to doing 5 minutes on your back, to exploring how that breath might feel when you're on your hands and knees, to exploring how that same breath feels like when you start to walk around with a weight in your hand if you're exercising or you're doing a heavy weighted exercise. So the best way to start is just by being aware of it and being intentional about it regularly, and then practicing on your back from anywhere to 3 to 5 minutes as you give your brain the time to register what's going on, the time to be able to see and feel where you get to expand that breath. And you have outlets. You have people out there that are speaking more about breathing than they did 10 years ago. It's not going anywhere. That's the beauty in it. And we're going to be using it until the day we go, everyone. So just be mindful of that as well.
I have a quick question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. So I missed some of this because I'm at work, but I wanted to know, when you say doing like a 4-second breath, do you mean just specifically like through your mouth or through your nose? Is there like a one way you'd want us to practice first, but more or not? You get what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's a great question. I love that question, actually. And I would suggest the most effective strategy for breathing and in general is breathing from our nose. So inhaling from our nose and exhaling from our mouth is, I would say, the best way to start. If it's difficult for some of us, that's totally fine. It's about getting started. Do I take a breath from my mouth? Yeah, every now and then I do. Sometimes I sleep and I wake up with my mouth open. And that's sometimes the reason why there's things out there. People will tape their mouths closed. I don't know if anyone's ever heard someone taping their mouth closed before they go to bed, but there's studies proven, and this is some of James Nestor's work, studies proven that by taping our mouth, we'll not only have better passage through our respiratory system, but it'll even change the structure of our jawline. It'll even have the ability of preventing us from getting sick. As we think about if we keep our mouth open, that gives more of an access to bacteria flowing into our mouth. So keeping our mouth closed and breathing through our nose allows the air to be conditioned and to be a bit more healthier for us to take in. So yes, my suggestion would definitely be to explore breathing through the nose and really getting comfortable with that. And then the next step would be, if you want to tape your mouth closed before you go to bed, that'll be something different to try. Hope that answers
I
your
have
question.
heard of I have heard of that. And like, it's like somebody, I forgot, somebody did try it and they were like, they did say that a lot had changed for them, like as far as like not getting sick. And they just started out like really, really small. Like even if they couldn't keep the tape on like the whole night, they would start out for as long as they could. And then just, kind of move on from that, like further and further for the whole night. So that's pretty cool. Thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome. It's definitely something to try out. It's definitely, it could be challenging in the beginning, but it's definitely something. It's one of the very many ways that we could explore this idea of breathing and how to master and come to more ownership of it.
Oh, thank you, Jihad. Yeah, I mean, I haven't heard of the taping of the mouth, but I have heard that for those with sleep apnea, it's better instead of the mask to have like a mouthpiece that keeps the jawline from or like the bottom of the jaw from falling, which helps the breathing overall. So, yeah, it's interesting that you said that.
Yeah, and remember, the big reason why I'm super grateful that you guys had me on today is whether you took something away from it that is going to change your life, or you're just a little bit more aware of breathing today. The whole big thing is really to inspire us to tap into our body more and truly work towards our full potential. And we shouldn't have energy leaks that are so simple that we could start to tap into that are free. So that's really the biggest thing that I'd like to share, is really just understanding that starting somewhere is better than starting nowhere. You guys are just a little bit more aware. And if you have ownership of your breath, you're more of the lower 10% or the top 10% of the world, I would say, when it comes to physical ownership and awareness.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jihad. I'm looking forward to see who wins this raffle. And we really appreciate you coming on here and, giving us your time for this whole thing. It's awesome to learn something new every day.
It's my pleasure, everyone. And
Thank
if
you.
you guys have any questions at all, please feel free to share any point of contact. This way, I'll definitely be able to help and support. And I look forward to meeting the two contestants that come by.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you. Have a good one. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.